What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty Podcast. I'm Bo. That is Brant. Coming at you live on the Fantasy Holics Podcast Network on YouTube. Brant, we haven't done one of these for a few weeks. It feels really, really good to get back. Got a lot of football that we have to digest, kind of break down, kind of see where we're feeling on some of these things. Still got some really exciting playoff matchups ahead of us. Some in-season awards to kind of see what happens. But man, we're done, right? I mean, normal football is done, but for degenerates like us, fantasy football addicts, this is just getting into another portion of football that we can't get enough of.
Right, absolutely. It's the playoff time. That season feels like it just flew by this year. It seems like, you blinked and it was week 15, and then, you blink again and the championships are over, and all of a sudden money's hitting your PayPal and you're like, oh, yep, this is legit. We're done. We're done. What am I supposed to do now? Well, that's what we're here for, is to help you know what you're supposed to do now and get ready for the next season. Today we're going to have a good show. We're going to talk about a couple guys that are we buying into what they did this year? Are we trying to sell it out the best we can there in the dynasty leagues? Forget about them in your redrafts, or are we ready to buy into what they did and everything else? And then we're going to break down, like we always do. We're going to get into our rookie talks. So I'm ready to go. Are you ready to go?
Better than that, I'm ready to eat.
Let's eat.
So, Brant, like you alluded to before the show, we're talking some guys who had way better year twos than they did, or way better this year's than they did last year or previous years. Guys that we don't really know whether to believe this year or years previous. Where are we at on these guys? I'm excited about this show because I've got two guys that I just can't get enough of at this point, and how they played towards the end of the season. Some guys that I trade for, some guys that I drafted high. I'm excited for this one. Let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited on a couple guys here. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be excited on, but we got to wait and see what that next year is going to bring with the two that I'm going to bring up here. Excuse me. You go ahead and kick us off with your first one real fast.
Okay, so my first one that I'm going to talk about is a guy that I actually can't believe when we started talking about this show. I didn't give you the name because I wanted you to take it yourself, but when you didn't, I couldn't help myself. But it's Jackson Smith-Njigba, better known as JSN, a.k.a. Mr. Geno Smith's new right-hand man, the bona fide weapon that we all thought he was coming out of college. After not really a disappointing year one, but a year one that was capped by a better alpha wide receiver in DK Metcalf, a fading Tyler Lockett in year one. Jackson Smith-Njigba exploded onto the scene this year. In 2023, Brant, he finished as wide receiver 48 in PPR leagues, 93 targets, 63 receptions, only 628 yards, 4 touchdowns. This year, playing the same amount of games, he finished as wide receiver 9 in PPR formats, 137 targets, 100 receptions, 1,130 yards receiving to go along with 6 touchdowns. You're talking 3 or 4 touchdowns away from this guy being a top 5 asset this year at the wide receiver position. And it was one that I think maybe, I don't know. I was going to say outside of Seattle, maybe we didn't see this coming, but I think even Seattle fans were thinking it was going to be another season of DK. You and I pulled off a pretty big trade for us in the offseason last year where I sent DK Metcalf your way. And I know you took that trade with the expectations DK was going to be the one in Seattle again. So I think it was really we saw the route tree really create separation for JSN. We saw how sure he was with the ball in his hands, how well he did at making people miss. Once he got the ball in his hands, he was very electric. And really down in the red zone, he was very shifty too. It almost kind of reminded me of prime Adam Thielen for some of his routes in the back of the end zone and such. So I'd love to hear your take on JSN as a Seahawks fan, but I'm all in on JSN moving into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I am too. DK, it wasn't a great year for DK this year. It was rough to see. As you alluded to, I did make the trade. JSN moving forward, I think is going to be the number one target getter there. Now I know we did fire Ryan Grubb, and McDonald came out and pretty much stated, we want to get to the PN, get our run game going in a lot of games. So I think maybe some of the pass attempts are going to come down, but that's just in my mind, that's going to make the targets even better than what they were this year. So I expect nothing but, him moving forward, being a top 15 wideout from here on out. I don't want to put him in the top 10 yet just because DK isn't there and maybe we have the new OC and we'll see how he unlocks it and with everything else. But I can't put him up in the top 10 yet, but I definitely think he's a top 15 wide receiver moving forward.
Which is a big leaps and bounds ahead of where we thought he would be maybe coming out of year two.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna stick with the skill position, guys, before we get into our quarterbacks here. And this one here, he started as the second running back on his team. His highest snap share this year was 64%. He was under 50% in 11 of these games. Now, the last game wasn't mapped out on the site that I saw, so this is out of 16 games, not 17. And he finished his RB13 with all that. And that was Bucky Irving. He started as the backup to Rachaad White, came out. A lot of people thought he was just going to be a change of pace guy, and he only had 8 total touchdowns this year. Like I said, he barely scratched the surface of playing 50% of snaps in every single game. This is a guy that is just a beneficiary of this offense, and I really want to know your take on how you see this moving forward. I think he's the number one guy. I think he's going to be 64% of the snaps or above in almost every game next year. I really do think he's the RB1 there in Tampa Bay moving forward.
Yeah, so I think what you're going to see again, and when you bring up offensive coordinators, it's worth mentioning that Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay, is probably going to be a head coach in the NFL someplace next year, which will then result in Baker Mayfield having 2 great seasons and getting 2 offensive coordinators jobs. But it sounds like Liam Cohen's kind of one of the hot names out there, for folks. And so I think, I say bear with that in mind, because last year Rachaad White was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And this year, obviously, his role got cut down almost in half or over half towards the end of the season. And Bucky Irving kind of reminds me of that Devon A-Chain-esque player where, a few touches in his hand and he's explosive. And I actually love to see this, Brant, because I remember prior to the NFL draft, how much I loved Bucky Irving. I did let his landing spot with Jeremy. I didn't get him in very many spots simply because of the fact that I believed in what I saw from Rachaad White. I know it wasn't very efficient, but volume is king. And they peppered him with the ball last year. But as we saw, a new offensive coordinator came in, Rachaad White started to get faded. So I'm a little nervous because Sean Tucker looked really good and he was able to be on the field as well last year. Now, the one thing I want to bring up about Bucky that I think is interesting, that, in one of our Fantasy Holics league, which is nothing but a bunch of guys that we're on this page with, we had a Bucky Irving trade today, Brant. And today Bucky Irving was traded for Jalen McMillan, a 2025 fourth, a 2025 second, a 2025 first, and another 2025 fourth. Now, the interesting part about this is the player who traded Bucky Irving tried to trade him to the same guy who traded for him today. It doesn't have a date on there. A couple of months ago, for 2 second-round picks, and the trade got rejected. So Bucky Irving's value shot through the ceiling in the second half of the season, and that's the kind of hauls. I'm telling you, yeah, I like Bucky Irving. He excites me. But if you're giving me a trade where I'm getting a stud young wide receiver plus a first and several other picks, I'm saying bye to Bucky, because I think we're coming into a day and age, Brant, with running backs. And I think Bucky's a prime example of this, where it's feed the hot hand, it's feed the young, explosive, fast, high-paced backs who aren't going to have necessarily 25, 30 touches a game. They're going to have 15, along with another back who's going to have 10 to 12. And so I just don't know how much I trust Bucky to repeat this next year. But, man, was he electric this year, Brant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you were lucky enough to get him off waivers, because most redrafts and everything, he was probably on your waivers. And if you were lucky enough to get him, he probably led you to, moving on into the playoffs and then possibly into the championship games.
Speaking of undersized, Brant, I'm going to talk about a guy who all year last year, all we did was hear about how he was too small to play in the NFL, couldn't read an NFL defense, all these things that everybody said last year about Bryce Young. And then this year he comes out, doesn't start very strong, gets benched for a few games for Andy Dalton. And honestly, if it wasn't for Andy Dalton's, unfortunate car accident or untimely car accident, I'm not sure Bryce Young gets another chance. But here he is, Dave Canales, quarterback whisperer, 3 years in a row. And Bryce Young, Brant, man, was he fun down the stretch. Obviously, I didn't love it necessarily week 18 as he and Michael Penix had a little duel down in Atlanta. But, man, was it one of the best, probably the best game of the weekend, honestly. As far as competitive overtime, both offenses were moving the ball at will. But anyway, in 2013 or 2023, Brant, 14 games as a starter, or 16 games as a starter, 23rd overall quarterback, 527 attempts, 315 completions, 2,877 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. This year, in only 14 games starting, finished his quarterback 20 overall, 384 passes, 234 completions, 2,403 yards, 15 touchdowns through the air to 9 interceptions, and he added 6 rushing touchdowns this year as well, Brant. Down the stretch, he had several games as a top 10 quarterback, 2 weeks as a top 5, with one of those being quarterback 1 in week 18, which I know you didn't have some of the big names playing. But, man, Bryce Young looked great, Brant. What's he going to do when he gets a couple bona fide stud wide receivers? Could you imagine if T. Higgins signs a free agent contract to play in Carolina next year?
Yeah, T. Higgins, or goes out and gets himself a young stud wide receiver in this draft. They solidified Chuba Hubbard being their running back for the future, so they already locked that up. Everyone thought it was going to be Jonathan Brooks coming in, and then unfortunate injury, you never really got to see him take off. So they're building this team around him now, and like you said, he sat down. He had to get sat down. It was one of those like, hey, come here, let's talk to the coach. Let me whisper in your ear here, and let's watch you have a career year like Geno Smith did and Baker Mayfield did underneath Canales. I absolutely am excited about Bryce Young moving forward. He's going to be a guy that's going to be targeted in a lot of drafts. You're going to be talking about him kind of like the CJ Stroud effect, a great year, and then all of a sudden he's going to jump up probably a little too high in some drafts of being drafted, but he's definitely going to be a guy that's going to be worthy of a starting spot next year in fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go with the guy that just couldn't cut the mustard for 6 years, and then finally he, gets the great landing spot, gets into with a great team, and that's Sam Darnold. He finished as QB9 this year, and really what I'm looking at is this something going forward with JJ McCarthy in the rear view mirror here, sneaking up on him. I know he's been he got hurt, and that's how Sam got the start. He was 361 for 545, 4,319 yards, 35 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. I'm not going to go over the rest of his stats during his career because they've been crap. They have not been good. He hasn't even sniffed close to a top 10 quarterback finish in his career. And now all of a sudden we're talking about a guy probably going to win comeback player of the year, if I had to guess. If, Bryce Young would have came out of the gate like that, it may have been a closer race. But I think Sam's probably in the lead for comeback player of the year. And And who would have thought that we'd be talking about Sam Darnold as a bona fide stud in fantasy football?
Yeah, I mean, that happens when you have, Justin Jefferson, arguably one of the greatest wide receivers in our league at this time. Another really great wide receiver in Jordan Addison, a good tight end, and TJ Hawkinson. And you're right, Brant. He was thought of as a stopgap, somebody to kind of mentor JJ McCarthy. And then all of a sudden, JJ McCarthy had to have knee surgery. And it was like, wait a minute, now how's this going to look? And I remember, I'm sure you do too, it was kind of like mass exodus and smashing the panic button on Justin Jefferson. I bet after the JJ McCarthy news, Brant, that was the cheapest you're going to get Justin Jefferson for a long, long time. And all Sam Darnold did this year was just solidify that, hey, man, this young kid who come out of college super young, who ended up getting mono super early in his career, missing time, seeing ghosts. It's not a Sam Darnold problem, Brant. It's a New York Jets problem. Aaron Rodgers sucks there. Zach Wilson sucks. Everybody sucks in New York Jet and a New York Jets uniform. And here we are seeing Sam Darnold get a second chance. I really do. I want to sing hate heaps and praises of Kevin O'Connell, because I think that was a big part of Sam Darnold's success this year. But man, you talk about quarterbacks robbing the bank last year with Kirk Cousins. Sam Darnold's about to get a Brinks truck backed up into his driveway, Brant, because even if Minnesota decides, hey, it was a great year, we're going to roll on next year with JJ, there's a lot of teams in this draft who don't have first-round grades on a lot of these quarterbacks that need a quarterback next year. Sam Darnold's going to be a starter in the NFL next year, and he's going to get paid.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be interesting offseason with some of these quarterbacks and seeing how they are moving forward. It's going to be fun to see.
So speaking of getting paid and being in the NFL next year, Brant, let's talk about some incoming rookies. The last time, it's been a few weeks, but the last time we did this, we did running backs. This week, it's only natural we're going to move on to the wide receivers.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some guys that may be a weapon for Mr. Bryce Young next year.
Or maybe Sam Darnold, depending on where he and they go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to start with the lesser-known name here, and that's Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. He's 6'3", 210 pounds. 200. Bleh, cat's got my tongue. 210 pounds. He's a senior transfer over to Ole Miss. He's played the SEC, so he's played against the pro caliber corners and safeties and linebackers that you'll see in the NFL. He's got the great prototypical ex-wide receiver. He's a big guy. He's got good hands. He ran a 4.5 40 coming out of high school. Obviously, I'm sure that's, maybe changed a little bit. He's got this great leaping ability. He's got strong hands. He's going to be a great red zone target, a great chain mover on big downs. But he also he needs to improve on his route running. He likes to bend his routes more than make those hard cuts. So he definitely will have to improve on his route running. And he doesn't get many yak yards. He doesn't have a good burst after he comes down. But I mean, with that great leaping ability, by the time you probably come down, there's probably 2 or 3 guys there. So if you don't have that burst to get out, so he'll have to work on that. And he does lack the elite separation skills. He does separate pretty decently, but it's not an elite separation skill. He had 60 receptions, 1,030 yards, and 7 touchdowns this year in Ole Miss with Jackson Dart throwing in the football. And it's a very good year. And I think this is going to be a guy you're going to be probably. I don't think he'll be a first round talent, but it's always funny to see how these wide receivers shoot up after the combine and everything. I see this guy being a mid second round to early third round talent coming out, and I think getting in the right spot, he could be a guy that you could be talking about as an ex wide receiver, and moving forward.
Yeah, and again, there really is. If you look at the NFL landscape, Brant, there's wide receiver needy teams. You look at the Green Bay Packers; they're needing an alpha. You look at Tyreek Hill saying he wants out in Miami; they're going to be looking for somebody to put opposite of Jalen Waddle again. Carolina Panthers. There's plenty of teams out there that have needs. That if any particular wide receiver go there, they're going to shoot up. It's going to be like the Kansas City Chiefs effect, right? Like, oh, this player got here and now they're the guy. Keon Coleman last year got drafted high, who I will say I liked a lot coming into last year, but didn't really perform a whole lot this year. Had some good games, some bright spots, but he's going to take some time to develop. Xavier Legette got drafted early and didn't really perform, didn't live up to expectations. But, again, there's opportunities out there for some of these guys, and some of them are going to go, like you said, in the first round. My guy, typically, I know on the show we don't do this, Brant, but I couldn't help myself being a Mizzou fan. You can see the Mizzou Tiger in the upper corner of the screen there. I had to talk about my guy, Luther Burden, who for a long time I made jokes about. It wasn't really a joke. For a long time, I thought I was going to let my passion dictate and take him 101 in our rookie draft in our home league. But Luther Burden had a kind of down year this year. Last year, his sophomore year was his big year for the Missouri Tigers. 21 years of age, won't turn 22 until a midway point of the season next year in the NFL. 5'11", 205 pounds. In his career, Brandy had 192 receptions, 2,263 yards, averaged 11.8 yards per catch, 21 touchdowns. Here's the thing. This is the part where it gets really juicy for me. I've watched a lot of Mizzou games this year. I've watched a lot of Luther Burden in the last 3 years. I've mentioned that name several times over the last 3 years. And when it comes to him coming to the league, I think you're going to get, if Luther Burden translates to the NFL, Brent, you're going to see a player that's a cross between a Steve Smith senior, who's an excellent route runner, sure hands, creates separation, and looks like Deebo Samuel with the ball in his hands in space. That's what I think you get out of Luther Burden if it translates. I think the ceiling for him in his first year in the NFL is Malik Neighbors-esque ceiling. I think a floor is JSN rookie. I think if you get him in the right spot, if Luther Burden is drafted by the Green Bay Packers, he's going to end up being the number one wide receiver off the board in fantasy drafts next year. I love Luther Burden. Can't say enough good things about him as a Mizzou fan. I'm excited to see what he looks like in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. Guy's a stud wide receiver. I haven't watched a whole lot of him. You having the higher draft picks, I'm just assuming I'm not going to get him in our home league. Eventually you'll probably find a way to attract him to your roster being a homer, but he is an absolute stud. And he's, if I'm not mistaken, he was top 5 recruit coming out, coming out of high school.
Number one wide receiver is that year.
Yeah, so it's absolutely going to, be interesting to see it. And one of these wide receiver needy teams are probably going to take him early to mid first round, I think.
I agree. That does it for this week's show, guys. Trying to keep them short and sweet this off season. We're going to try to be back more regularly as well. So next week we'll be back, maybe tight end, maybe rookie wide receiver or a rookie quarterback, one of the two off positions. And we're just going to come at you every week, hang out for 15, 20 minutes. Get you through the off season.
Absolutely. That does it for today. As always, stay hungry.
Stay fat, my friends.